The assassination of Charlie Kirk has shocked conservatives across the world.
Is this a pivotal moment for freedom of speech? We speak to somebody who knew the father of two.
I've never seen anything like this. I think I'm not exaggerating here when I say that I think this might be a Martin Luther King Jr. level assassination, because I can't think of a more famous political assassination since Martin Luther King Jr. Of course, prior to him, you had RFK and JFK, but this is a real movement because he was so popular and he was really nice. And he wore his Christianity, his faith on his sleeve. He wore his conservatism on his sleeve, but not in a pushy, not in an obnoxious way. I mean, maybe some people thought he was obnoxious because he was willing to answer questions and to make the argument.
The words, the assassination of Charlie Kirk. I was walking into the studio and thought, I can't really believe this has happened. I couldn't really believe what I was seeing last night. And the visceral nature of opening a video, seeing that just heinous act of wanton violence. I don't know, and we've now got quite a lot of rhetoric around how worried we should all be on the right. I mean, how worried we should all be in general to express an opinion in public that others may disagree with. Look, of course we know that words don't kill, people do. But how disturbing is this, Tim? We are hearing from the Wall Street Journal and others that law enforcement officials say that messages of transgender and anti-fascist ideology appeared on ammunition inside the rifle. So let's be in no doubt at all, yes, this was a political assassination, and it appears as if Charlie Kirk was killed because of his opinions and his beliefs. Yes, I know the UK isn't America, okay? We don't have the right to bear arms, thank goodness. But we've had political assassinations here in recent years. Sir David Amess.
Joe Cox.
Joe Cox. You and I get our fair share of abuse on social media. People are pretty bloody nasty. Not for the first time in recent years. I've sort of reflected on what I'm saying. My husband has quite often said to me, you do have to be careful. And I'm thinking, I don't really want to live in a world where me and what I regard to be my fairly moderate views need to be careful.
Every Sunday my mother says to me, don't write about Israel. And I see where she's coming from. I think I saw it on a train because the videos of the shooting were inescapable and were released within minutes of it happening. By the time I got home and was sitting on the settee, he had died. It had been announced that he had died, and the president had put out a statement. I think a lot of us were in shock, and you and I were sharing messages, and I was sharing them with various other people. Because he's young, he's just 31, he's the father of two. Because his whole thing was about civil discourse. You might not, as some people on television felt the need to say, agree with everything he said. There's always a caveat before showing sympathy towards conservatives. But his whole point was, I will come to you and I'll have a discussion about it, and we will leave, shake hands, and maybe I'll change your mind. So to target someone who really was about free speech and engagement just felt particularly cruel.
Yes, in the arena of a university campus.
Yes.
Where his sole purpose, prove me wrong.
And he was not a vindictive person.
No.
Only a few weeks before, South Park had produced a very witty satire of him, showing him, as he always used to do, sitting with a bottle of water and saying, change my mind. And he laughed at it. It didn't drive him mad. So this was as a character, this felt like the wrong person for this to happen to. But there is also a part of us, as people who are conservative and are involved in ideas and debate, of a feeling of, the arena has just turned really awful.
Yes.
And now anything's possible. And I'm not saying it's about it happening to us. I don't feel under personal threat. I'm not enough of an ego to think anyone cares about what I write. It's more just, and it's the worst thing to admit, but I saw that and I thought, that's going to happen again.
And Jeremy Clarkson, who, let's be honest, isn't a man sort of prone to hysteria, has tweeted, he feels worried now about what he's going to be writing.
Yes.
And how people might react to it, which I think is significant. But surely the whole thing about Charlie Kirk as well, which is to be admired whether you agreed or disagreed with him, was simply his willingness to have an argument publicly and to have a debate and to voice opinions, which he backed up with evidence, but to foster the spirit of debate in young people for whom, for far too long, many of them have felt silenced. Mm-hmm. That's the whole point. My son's reaction to this last night was quite telling, really, because I said, Charlie Kirk's been shot. Of course, he immediately sees the footage. And I do think we have to have a conversation, not least as it's the anniversary of 9/11 today, about how desensitized we have become.
Oh, yes.
To seeing really very violent imagery play out before our very eyes. And I think it is something that happened when the Twin Towers came down and it was on video and we were watching it in real time, that we now appear to have an appetite to see things happen. Mm-hmm. And I'm not comfortable with that. And I wasn't comfortable with my children, 16, 15 and 12.
Mm-hmm. Think of how hard it would have been at the time or in the decades afterwards to see the Zapruder tape of Jack Kennedy being shot. And the way in which it's treated almost like a holy relic.
Yes.
By contrast, this video is up instantaneously and unavoidable.
And there's an argument to be had for we have to see this. We can't close our eyes to what is happening. And it was the same with the footage of the murder of the Ukrainian refugee Irina Zarutska. I was taught in journalism school, so to speak. There was an example given of a boxer that was killed in the ring. Do you put the photograph of him dead on the front page? No, you don't. Tell, don't show in a way. Yeah. But back to my son, and I said to him this morning, what are your feelings about this? And he goes, well, it's scary. He says, I think it darkens my generation. I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he obviously appreciated somebody trying to encourage young people to be free with their thoughts and their opinions in a public arena. That's not something that my children had witnessed up until that point. And there has been a debate about the erosion of right versus left in schools and in universities. This idea that if you happen to be a right-leaning child, that you can't really speak up because most of the teaching profession are left-leaning. That does filter into teachings in class. It does. Mm-hmm. It filters into history. It filters into English. It filters into assemblies. Because at the time of the kind of cancel culture wars where you couldn't say things like, oh, but miss or sir, I don't think a man can be a woman and I don't think a woman can be a man, that you would be shunned and put in the corner, not just told I disagree with you, but you're a bigot. That's filtered down to the next generation. It's not just something we've had to deal with. So Charlie Kirk, and my daughter wasn't a big fan of his, didn't like his evangelizing. They just appreciated somebody having the courage to stand up on behalf of them, being able to express a view without being cancelled, without being told to shut up, without being told that their opinion didn't count because it wasn't of a kind of, TikTok naturally left-leaning disposition.
And that's why his organization that he founded, Turning Points USA, used to go to universities and debate with students. Now, the big context of this is until about 2008, 2010, conservatives in America felt they were losing a lot of elections, and they couldn't understand why, because they felt they had the strong arguments, and they felt they had nailed the economic argument in particular. But they were still losing to people like Barack Obama, who they thought could never get elected because they thought he was left-wing and a socialist. Whether you think that's fair or not, that's what they thought. And a theory began to develop, promoted by a provocateur called Andrew Breitbart, that, to quote, politics is downstream from culture. The problem with conservatives is they had been targeting electoral races and trying to win contests. They hadn't actually been looking at the culture that shapes the minds of the voters. So Charlie Kirk was part of a movement of cultural conservatives who we can call MAGA, attached to Trump, who decided that what they needed to do before they ran candidates for election was to challenge the culture, be it what Hollywood produces, what's shown on TV, what's shown on the internet, or what's taught in schools. So Turning Points USA would go around campuses, exposing kids who might not hear it to conservative ideas. Now, it should be acknowledged that what Kirk did was controversial, because some people felt what he was actually trying to do was shut down liberal voices on campus by naming and shaming left-wing academics, and by so doing, frightening them out of doing their job of teaching. So some people were really quite against Kirk for that reason.
Yes.
We should also acknowledge that, of course, Democrats and left-wingers get targeted for violence too. And right now, conservatives are naturally feeling very vulnerable. But I think any of those projecting this idea that there is a specific war against conservatives and liberals not, I think that's a big mistake. I think that's very misleading. The problem is that everything's turning violent and nasty. It's not just that conservatism is not a protected characteristic. It's not like an ethnic minority. There's no attempt to persecute conservatives. But that is how it is perceived by them, in part because of the double standard of how people react to it, that when conservatives are shot, there's always this instinctual sense of, well, maybe they brought it on themselves.
Yes.
And I think that reflects two things about the left. One is that sense of virtue, that you don't check your own privilege. Left-wingers don't check their own privilege. They don't check what they're saying, because they're good people. They can say anything. They can say the most horrible, nasty, and sensitive things, but I am saying it for the right reasons.
Yes.
Like, I noticed that Kevin Maguire, a journalist who used to be at the Mirror, very helpfully pointed out that Charlie Kirk was against gun control and was shot by a gun. Oh, well done.
Yes.
But again, I'm so virtuous, I'm going to step into the situation and use it as an opportunity to remind people of how right I am. And the second thing that characterizes so many on the left is a prioritization of politics over everything else, including interpersonal relationships. So the first thought is not, this is just a human being's died. That's bad in and of itself. It's, what does this mean politically?
This is the other thing I object to when it comes to some of the absolutely appalling and disgusting comments that have been made by people who disagreed with Charlie Kirk. So we've got this rhetoric on Blue Sky now, people dancing on his grave. They leave X because it's apparently too toxic, and then are quite willing to engage in this. I mean, can you ever imagine a scenario, frankly? I mean, first of all, nobody on the right caveats people who are attacked on the left.
But nobody in their...
I don't agree with them, but, you know...
But no one in their daily life does that. Can you imagine being invited to a funeral to deliver the eulogy and opening with, I just want to make it clear that I didn't like this person one bit, but it's sad they're dead.
I suppose all of us exist in echo chambers. But, you know, commentators on the left, imagine reveling in the assassination of any commentator on the left. It's an unthinkable premise.
I wouldn't do it.
But by people who, by the way, think they're the goodies, claim the moral high ground, you know, bask in their own progressiveness. These are the least tolerant people on earth.
We're now joined by Greg Swenson, the chairman of Republican Overseas. Greg, I know that you met Charlie Kirk a number of times. Could you describe his character to us, give us a sense of the man?
Yeah, Charlie was just a really decent human being. He was passionate about his faith. He was passionate about politics and conservative politics, and he was persuasive. You know, he enjoyed making the argument, making persuasion of, especially of young people, his priority. You know, he was great. You know, obviously focused on universities and sort of Generation Z. And did a really great job with not only communicating and converting people to conservatives, but even he liberated existing conservatives that were basically closeted in these universities, and even some of the corporations. You know, for a lot of the kids, you know, first jobs right after college, they couldn't admit in the workplace that they were conservatives or voted Republican. I mean, it was just really a difficult time. This is a few years back, but he's done a really good job liberating those students and really bringing them into the conservative movement.
Greg, can you explain to us, why did Charlie Kirk choose to go to universities? What was the thinking behind targeting young undergraduates and trying to expose them to opinions they might not have heard?
Yeah, the interesting thing, and it's a great question. I mean, the interesting thing is no one else had ever tried it, really. I mean, there was loosely defined organizations, college Republican clubs that nobody ever went to. But I think it was because in high school, he and many other students started to understand that even the high schools were really co-opted by the progressive left. And probably a remnant of the 60s when the students of the 60s ended up being the next generation's professors and administrators. And so it probably started in high school, and I'm sure he didn't go to university, but I'm sure his friends that were attending the universities, especially in the Midwest and the Big Ten, probably were coming home with stories about just how illiberal the professors and the administrators were, and there was just a lack of tolerance for any diversity of thought, and I think that's what really drove him, and he started reaching out. At the time they were kids that were his age, and he had some real connectivity, and so it was a really interesting movement, and it really did turn out to be the most successful conservative movement ever, directed at university students and people in their 20s.
Greg, up until the second presidency of Trump and indeed the re-emergence of Nigel Farage in the political scene in the UK, the term young conservative used to be a bit of an oxymoron. We know that Charlie Kirk wasn't initially a huge Trump fan. He came towards his way of thinking over the course of time. But how influential do you think he was in the young MAGA movement and in Trump's re-election? Because we did witness a surge in support among the young, and particularly young men. That's been put down to podcasters like Joe Rogan, but also social media figures like Charlie Kirk. Can you try and quantify his contribution in that sense?
Absolutely. I mean, I can't necessarily put a number on it, but surely Charlie was probably the most influential. That doesn't mean that the Joe Rogan podcast wasn't meaningful, and Barstool Sports. There are other communicators, especially male communicators, that had an influence. But it was definitely driven by Charlie at the university level. And as those students graduated from university every year and got into the workforce, they sort of carried that. And I can even explain. I have two children in their 20s, and my daughter, works at Goldman Sachs and couldn't admit at work that she was a conservative. And that was 2 years ago. That's changed. And I think even at the universities, it was really difficult. So, see, in many ways, he helped expose the bias at the universities and the bias in the HR departments of these big companies, and also, gave permission in many ways for the students to come out of the closet in terms of being a conservative. So I think he had a long-lasting effect on those students, and now those students are some of them are in their late 20s and early 30s, and they've really started with Charlie, and my daughter is probably a great example of that.
Do you think that young people now are going to be more prone to expressing conservative views, or more afraid? I mean, Tim and I have been discussing for this podcast, what does this mean for people on the right? Should we be worried? I mean, the last thing Charlie Kirk would want would be for it to shut down debate. Right. And yet we seem to be entering a different sphere now, that you can be gunned down in public for expressing a view that others disagree with.
Yeah, it's really difficult. I don't think the latter will happen. I think there will be more free speech because he was such a great advocate of it. And he did it with a smile on his face, and he did it in a way where he embraced people who didn't agree with him and made the argument, and he was very persuasive. So I think, if anything, that will continue. I don't think anybody wants to go back to the dark days of censorship and cancel culture, which we had in America. I mean, I know we talk about it a lot in the UK right now, but 4 years ago, it was robust in America, both cancel culture and censorship and collusion between government and government agencies with the media companies. And I think these young people are smart enough to know that the best way to manage that is have the argument, have the debate, and be persuasive, and not be afraid. Have some courage.
Greg, I think a lot of people don't appreciate how much the conservative movement is a family. And so many people have taken this killing very personally. I didn't know
Yeah,
him. I knew people who did know him, but I feel as though I
yeah,
did know him. Is that a fair reflection of how conservatives have taken this killing?
yeah. It really is. I've never seen anything like this. I think I'm not exaggerating here when I say that I think this might be a Martin Luther King Jr. level assassination, because I can't think of a more famous political assassination since Martin Luther King Jr. Of course, prior to him, you had RFK and JFK, but this is a real movement because he was so popular and he was really nice, and he wore his Christianity, his faith on his sleeve. He wore his conservatism on his sleeve, but not in a pushy, not in an obnoxious way. I mean, maybe some people thought he was obnoxious because he was willing to answer questions and to make the argument, but he did it in a very Christian way with a smile on his face, and he, in many ways, he participated in this common sense revolution, which we've definitely seen in America, and I think we're seeing it in parties of the right, like Reform here in the UK. So he was very much a part of that movement, and good for him. And I think that if anything, I don't think there'll be a pullback from that. Yeah, there's some safety issues, and I know people in the cabinet and who have full-time security staff, and even the spouses have that. And so it's unpleasant, but when we've had a history of political violence in America, I mean, the founding fathers really hated each other in many ways. Their rhetoric was much worse than what we have today. And then, of course, you had Lincoln, followed by McKinley and others that have been assassinated. So, I think this will pass, but I do think that the common sense revolution and the diversity of thought is here to stay. And I think that's partly due to the courage of Charlie Kirk.
How personally do you think that Donald Trump is feeling this? It's a very poignant day in
Yeah,
America today anyway. We've got the President and the First Lady commemorating the 24th anniversary of 9/11.
yeah,
He will have known Charlie Kirk very, very well as a friend, and those around him and his children and all the rest of it have been paying tribute. But, I mean, this was a key ally. This is a key ally, not just personally, but politically and professionally,
yeah.
Greg.
All of the above, and I think it is really personal. And the sentiment I've seen on social media and on the cable news networks, it's really overwhelming. And my two good friends in London, who are very close to Charlie Kirk, really upset. I spent a lot of time with my daughter, who was very upset. Of course, my wife. It's been really difficult, and that's why I say it's kind of that Martin Luther King moment, where this is a powerful moment. He wasn't a politician, he wasn't just an elected representative. He was a movement conservative, and was so successful at liberating young people.